Cell division is the foundation or cornerstone of life. It is synonymous to the foundation of any building or house, with each cell being similar in function to each brick in the walls of a building. Mitosis occurs in all body cells except sex cells. Another name for body cells is somatic cells, and sex cells are called gametes. Cell division occurs inside the nucleus. Mitosis occurs in 5 stages. These are interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. The first stage of mitosis is interphase. During interphase, the cell has the appearance of a normal cell. The chromosomes are not visible. They exist as long, thin strands called chromatin threads. Chromatin is made up of 40% DNA and 60% protein. It is at this stage the DNA starts to replicate itself. The second stage of mitosis is called prophase. During prophase, the chromosomes replicate and become visible. Each chromosome is made up of 2 chromatids, and these chromatids are held together by a centromere. The centrioles, which are usually beside each other, move to opposite ends of the cell. The nucleolus disappears, and the nuclear envelope breaks down. The centrioles are important during cell division. They form fibers called spindle fibers. These fibers attach themselves to the centromere on each chromosome. The third phase of mitosis is metaphase. At this stage, the chromosomes line up around the equator of the spindle fibers. These fibers attach themselves to the centromere on each chromosome and pull the chromosome apart. The fourth stage of mitosis is called anaphase. At this stage, the centromere splits into 2, and the spindle fibers pull the centromere to opposite ends of the cell. The chromosome is also split into 2 chromatids. The chromatids are pulled to opposite ends of the cells behind the centromere. The final phase of mitosis is called telophase. When the chromatids reach the opposite ends of the cell, they unravel to form chromatin again. The spindle fibers break down and the centrioles replicate themselves. The nuclear membrane reforms around the chromosomes at the end of the cell. This leads to the formation of 2 nuclei. Telophase is usually followed by cytokinesis, which is the physical division of the cytoplasm into 2 daughter cells. Explain the role of mitosis in asexual reproduction. Explain why asexual reproduction gives rise to identical offspring. Mitosis and artificial vegetative reproduction. Cutting. Cutting the stem, leaf, or root and replacing it in water, soil, or hormones stimulates tissue growth. The advantage to artificial vegetative reproduction is that it produces new plants identical to the parent. It is also faster than growing a plant from a seed. Recap. Mitosis is a process of cell division which results in the production of two daughter cells from a single parent cell. The daughter cells are identical to one another and to the original parent cell. Cell division is needed so that organisms can grow, damaged cells can be repaired, and reproduction can occur. It involves division of the nucleus followed by division of the cytoplasm. During nuclear division, the chromosomes become visible, each made of two chromatids. After the chromosomes are replicated, they must become aligned so that the separation process can occur in an orderly fashion. All cells except gametes divide by the process of mitosis to produce two identical daughter cells whose nuclei contain the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. This allows for genetic continuity. Mitosis is also the basis of asexual reproduction. This means that during both processes, identical copies of the parent organism or cell are produced. In addition, only one parent is needed. It should be noted, however, that mitosis doesn't always involve making another organism. Instead, it just copies a cell, whereas asexual reproduction involves the creation of a whole other organism. Mitosis and asexual reproduction. Unicellular organisms produce identical offspring by the process of binary fission, which is the simplest form of asexual reproduction. One parent cell becomes two identical daughter cells. Question. Can you now use the information about mitosis to explain the two stages of binary fission which you learned earlier on in school? A. Nucleus divides. B. Cell divides. For example, an amoeba. When an amoeba is ready to divide, it becomes round and mitosis occurs in the nucleus. After nuclear division, its cytoplasm pinches in and results in two identical daughter cells which grow to full size and repeat the process. Regeneration. This is the process by which lost body parts are regenerated. Some organisms can regenerate an entire body, while others can only regenerate a limb. Mitosis and vegetative reproduction. Vegetative reproduction is another form of asexual reproduction. This occurs in plants. Cloning. Cloning is the production of many genetically identical copies of an individual by asexual reproduction. Plants are usually easier to clone than animals. Cloning is done especially in agriculture, where there is a plant with favorable characteristics. Through cloning, a large number of that same plant can be made. Animals are also cloned. In 1996, the first vertebrate was cloned. This was when they cloned the sheep Dolly. A cell was taken from her udder and used to make other sheep which were genetically identical to her. Asexual reproduction may happen by binary fission, vegetative propagation, and cloning. This is the process of asexual reproduction in plants. Tulips and onions reproduce by bulbs, which is a short stem that is underground. New bulbs sprout from the old one, and each new bulb gives rise to a new leafy plant. Potatoes reproduce by tubers, which is an enlarged part of the short stem that is underground. The eyes become tiny buds. Each bud becomes a shoot, which penetrates the soil and grows up. The bud also forms roots. Carrots and onions sometimes start growing in the vegetable basket if they remain there for a long time. Grass reproduces with runners, which is a stem that grows sideways and buds, while banana plants reproduce via suckers, which is a new plant that grows from the parent plant, which dies at the end of its cycle. Ferns reproduce by rhizomes, which is a stem that grows sideways and underground. Buds are produced. Nutgrass is very hard to remove from the lawn unless the entire rooting system is removed during weeding. Mitosis.
E-Learning Jamaica Limited, in association with the Ministry of Education and SED Jamaica Limited, present a series of e-learning videos geared towards preparing students for CXC examinations. This series focuses on biology. There are 10 videos, each lasting 20 minutes. Your narrator, Michael Anthony.
This video focuses on Section B of your syllabus, which covers life processes. Learning outcomes. At the end of this section, you should be able to define the terms stimulus and response, define receptors and effectors, explain the relationship between receptor, the central nervous system, and effector. Identify the main sense organs and the stimuli to which they respond. Define coordination. All living things must undergo 7 specific processes: feeding, respiration, excretion, movement, growth, reproduction, and sensitivity. In this video, we will look at the process of sensitivity. What is sensitivity?
Sensitivity is also called irritability. In order to understand sensitivity and the nervous system, one must first establish how it works. 2 key words that may help with this are stimulus and response.
When someone is tickled at the sole of their feet and they laugh, the tickling is the stimulus, and the laughter is the response.
When someone is pricked with a pin and they cry out, the pain is the stimulus, and the cry of pain is the response. When a carpenter accidentally strikes his finger with a hammer, the blow from the hammer is the stimulus, and the resulting reaction is the response.
Have you ever hit your elbow on a desk? If you have, you would know that this is very painful and triggers a feeling similar to an electric shock. What is a stimulus?
A stimulus may be defined as a change in the environment that brings about a response. A response is the reaction to a stimulus. For example, if your hand touches a hot pot, the hot pot would be the stimulus, and the response would be the quick removal of the hand. Another example is if you hit your toe on a stone. The pain would be the stimulus, and the crying out would be the response.
But how do you know that the pot is hot, or when you stub your toe?
In order to detect the stimulus, receptors need to be present in the body. Receptors are organs or groups of cells which detect changes in the external or internal environment. To carry out a response, effectors need to be present. Effectors are parts of an organism that carry out a response. They are usually attached to muscles which allow them to stimulate actions like jumping and running.
The sense organs of the body allow us to detect different types of stimuli. Each sense organ has different types of receptors. For example, the receptors in the eye detect changes in light. The receptors in the ear detect changes in sound waves to establish loud and soft sounds, as well as high and low frequency sounds. The receptors in the nose detect different chemical stimuli in the air. The receptors in the tongue detect chemical changes to bring about different tastes in different types of foods. The skin, however, has many specialized receptors. These are able to detect pain, pressure, heat, and cold. Do you know that some stimuli are internal? For example, when you feel hungry, your blood sugar level falls, and the message is sent to the brain, which triggers the response of you getting food. In order to respond to a stimulus, receptors and effectors must coordinate.
Coordination is the way in which receptors pick up stimuli and pass them onto the brain or spinal cord and cause the appropriate responses.
Let us review. Sensitivity is the ability of an organism to respond to a stimulus, thereby making it aware of its environment. A stimulus is a change in the environment which brings about a response. A response is a reaction to a stimulus. Receptors are parts of the organism that detect a stimulus. Sense organs contain receptors. Each sense organ responds to different stimuli. The eyes respond to light. The ears respond to sound. The nose and tongue respond to chemicals. The skin responds to pressure, temperature, and pain. Effectors are parts of the organism that respond to a stimulus. Coordination is the way in which receptors pick up stimuli and pass them on to the brain or spinal cord and cause the appropriate responses. Learning outcomes. At the end of this section, you should be able to list the different parts of a nerve cell, list the 3 types of neurons, distinguish between the different types of neurons, define reflex, define reflex arc.
Connected to each receptor and effector are specialized nerve cells called neurons. Neurons send the messages to and from the brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord make up the central nervous system, the CNS.
Each neuron or nerve cell has 3 basic parts. 1. A cell body which possesses a nucleus and other cell structures suspended within the cytoplasm. 2. Dendrites, which are long, thin finger-like projections or fibers which conduct impulses towards the cell body. 3. The axon, which conducts impulses away from the cell body through a long, thin fiber. The axon is covered with a layer of fatty cells called the myelin sheath. This aids in the fast flow of impulses along the nerve. Points along the axon where there are no myelin sheaths are called nodes of Ranvier. There are 3 types of neurons: sensory neuron, relay or intermediate neuron, and motor neuron. Neurons can be grouped based on the direction in which they conduct nerve impulses. The sensory neuron connects directly to the receptor. Sensory neurons detect stimuli and carry signals to the central nervous system. The motor neuron carries a signal from the central nervous system to the effectors. It connects directly to the effectors. The intermediate or relay neuron creates a link between the sensory and the motor neuron. They are found in the central nervous system.
Neurons are not physically connected to each other. There is a gap where the ends of 2 neurons meet. This small gap is known as a synapse. When the receptors are stimulated by a stimulus, an electrical impulse is generated. This electrical impulse or sensation travels from the receptor to the brain. The brain interprets the signal and then sends a message to the effectors to bring about an appropriate response. For example, when a hand touches a hot surface, the receptors in the skin detect the sudden change in temperature and sends a signal to the central nervous system. The brain then interprets the signal and passes a message to the effectors, causing the swift lifting of the hand.
Some responses occur rapidly, without us even thinking about it. These responses are known as reflexes. A reflex is a quick, automatic response to a stimulus. The pathway between the effectors and the receptors in a reflex action is called the reflex arc.
The diagram seen here shows a simple reflex arc, which involves the sensory neuron, relay neuron, and the motor neuron. The receptor detects the stimulus, which sends the nerve impulses to the sensory neuron. The sensory neuron then transfers the impulses to the relay neuron within the CNS in order for it to be interpreted. The interpreted impulses are sent to the motor neuron, which is attached to the effector. The effector is usually a muscle or gland. It is at this point the response is triggered. Nerves that come out of the spinal cord and go to the arms, legs, and trunk of a body are called spinal nerves. Nerves that come out of the brain and extend into the head are called cranial nerves. Due to this, there are two types of reflexes, the spinal reflex and the cranial reflex. The spinal reflex occurs when the sensory neuron forms a synapse with the motor neuron within the spinal cord. An example of this on the body is when you tap your knee in a certain place, your leg gives a little kick. This is called the knee jerk, and it is often used by doctors to find out if the patient's spinal cord is working properly. A very common example of the cranial reflex is a pupil reflex. If a bright light is shone in your eye, a reflex reaction occurs. The pupil gets smaller and prevents too much light from entering the eye. The opposite happens in dim light. The pupil gets larger, allowing more light to enter the eye.
Let us review. Attached to each effector and receptor are nerve cells called neurons. Neurons are made up of three basic parts: cell body, dendrite, and axon. The three types of neurons are sensory neuron, intermediate or relay neuron, and motor neuron. Synapses are tiny spaces found at the end of two neurons where they meet. A reflex action is a quick, automatic response to a stimulus. Learning outcomes. At the end of this section, you should be able to explain why the response to stimuli is important for the survival of organisms. Describe the function of the human skin in temperature regulation. Describe the functions of the main regions of the brain. Why is it important for us to respond to stimuli?
The body is made up in such a way that it protects itself from damage by responding quickly to stimuli. This prevents the body from being severely damaged. Sensitivity allows us to protect ourselves and is important for survival. There are times when we need to move very quickly to avoid danger. For example, when using the roads daily or playing certain sports.
Involuntary actions. Some reactions like breathing, peristalsis, and sweating are automatically controlled by specific nerves of the body. These actions are involuntary actions, and they are controlled by the autonomic nervous system.
Whenever the human body is exposed to certain temperatures, it must adapt in order for it to function properly. Sweating is a response to high temperature. When the body sweats, water is given off. The water evaporates and cools the body.
When the body detects that the external surroundings are too cold, it sends the message to the central nervous system. The central nervous system interprets the message of being cold and sends a response that calls the body's temperature to increase. The response produces goosebumps, and shivering. In cold weather, the body also constricts or reduces the size of the blood vessels in the skin. This reduces the amount of blood flowing to the skin and therefore reduces the amount of heat loss from the surface of the skin. In hot weather, the opposite occurs. The blood vessels near the surface of the skin dilate or increase the size. This increases the amount of blood near the surface of the skin. More heat is lost from the body and more sweat is produced to cool the skin. Here is a chart that explains how the body maintains a constant temperature. Please discuss it with your teacher. When the body gets too cold, it may trigger you to wear warm clothing. When the body is too hot, what do you think will happen? Some persons may even use a fan or wear lighter clothing. The brain is one of the main parts of the central nervous system. It is divided into three main sections. They are the cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. The cerebrum is responsible for all voluntary activities of the body. The cerebrum deals with learning,
which will run from here.
Memory, intelligence, and judgment. The cerebellum is located below the cerebrum. The cerebellum deals with the coordination of body movements or motor skills and balance, like writing, dancing, and riding a bicycle. The medulla oblongata is also known as the brain stem. It is concerned with involuntary actions such as breathing, peristalsis, heartbeat, and blood pressure. Let us review. When the weather gets hot, sweating and dilation of the blood vessels in the skin occurs in the body. When the weather is cold, the body starts to shiver and the blood vessels in the surface of the skin constricts. The brain is one of the main parts of the central nervous system. It is divided into three main sections. They are the cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. The cerebrum is responsible for all voluntary activities of the body. The cerebellum deals with the coordination of body movements or motor skills. The medulla oblongata, it is concerned with involuntary actions such as breathing and blood pressure.